and people are looking for something new, just like the people in England are looking for something new. And it's really the difference. The difference between them is: do you want Wales to be an independent country? Do you not? It's really the only real difference between Welsh Labour and Plaid Cymru.
If England decided to go it alone and break up the union, which then would mean Wales are on their own. Hi everybody, and welcome back to Nick Talks. This episode's amazing guest, first time on the channel, is a gentleman I discovered when I was flicking through YouTube. And you might be flicking through YouTube now going, what's this video about? And that's exactly what I did with this gentleman's video. I watched it and went, wow, that's made me think completely differently. I want to talk to him. And luckily, he answered my email and agreed to come on. So first of all, Benjamin and Gwyn, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for watching my work.
No, you're welcome. Your videos are about Wales. That's where you live, obviously. And the video I watched was about how England impacts Wales, and what the Welsh need to do is make decisions that benefit them, and be a bit hesitant about jumping into English problems when if you make a mistake, it can backfire for Wales, which is very sensible advice. And then that made me think along the lines of, I've never thought before about how England, which is the biggest country in the UK, most powerful, largest population, how that impacts my cousins. And I class the Welsh, Northern Ireland and the Scottish as my cousins because we come from these islands. And then it started making me thinking, what do the Welsh think of the English? What do the Welsh think of what's happening in England at the moment? Because nationalism is rising in England now. It seems to be finding its voice. We've got problems, you've got problems, mostly the same problem. And I thought, well, I'll speak to you and maybe you can give me a Welsh perspective on what's going on. Over to you, Benjamin.
Yeah, well, Wales, like England, it's a country in the West and in Europe. And in every country, not just Wales. I mean, you see it in France, you see it in America, Australia, Japan with a new conservative prime minister, I think they call it. You have this battle of identity and battle between identity and globalization. Now, the Celtic countries are a bit different because, well, let's go back to when Celtic nationalism was really beginning in the 19th century. So actually, they weren't left-wing like you think of today. Excuse me. The founder of the Cornish Cornish language revival, was actually a Jacobite, kind of an arch early Tory figure. The early Welsh nationalists were classical liberals, you could say, and that kind of fed on to David Lloyd George in the end. The early socialists and Welsh nationalists, they hated each other. And it's remarkable that after World War II, and during that period of the interwar period, it flipped. And you had a lot of men coming home from Britain's imperial wars. And it disproportionately affected the Welsh because we didn't have jobs to go to when the economic downturns came. We didn't have yes, we had the industrial base of the valleys, but if you wanted to go to the north or west Wales, like Cardiff, the population just shrank, like it halved in most places as men left, and that left a bit of resentment in Welsh society. Now, Scotland's a bit different. They had Glasgow, but we didn't have a large city like that to keep people, and it drained our towns. Now, I can't say the same about Ireland because to me that's a bit like two religious nutters fighting in the attic. But I have respect for Irish people, but it's not really my knowledge. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah. So the video I watched was then talking about some historical things that happened over the last 1,000 years, from the Jacobite rebellion to I can't remember it all now, but other things about some of the Welsh didn't get involved. Sometimes they got involved, and then you judged them. Was that decision beneficial to Wales or not? And you put a big tick or a big cross. I found that they're very easy to follow. Let's bring all that up to the modern day. What I mean, you don't speak for all the Welsh people, but you know more Welsh people than me, so you've got a better idea than me. What's the Welsh feeling at the moment with things like mass immigration, the violence we're seeing on the streets, knife crime, the fact that we seem to be blaming illegal migrants for a lot of it, and it looks like the economy is in a really bad place. What's the Welsh take on that at the moment?
Well, just like England and Ireland and France, it's hard to put one take because what makes a country is that there's different regions within that country that you have different views. And I think one issue the Welsh nationalists have had is they don't view the valleys as having a different moral framework to Gwynedd, for example. And what we're seeing is after Thatcher took out the industry there, there's never really been any hope since then. And it's been Labour rule that whole time, in Wales at least. And people are looking for something new, just like if people in England are looking for something new. You've had these two parties wrestle back and forth. And one thing that most English people won't know is that over the last 15 years, you've had a few pop-up parties in Wales or individuals. You had Llais Gwynedd, means voice of Gwynedd up in the northwest. You had Neil McAvoy with Propel around Cardiff. You'd have a couple radical left-wing ones in the valleys. And these were expressions of people not being happy with the two main parties. Now, when I say two main parties, you think Labour, Tory, but really we have Labour and Plaid Cymru as our two main parties. And it's really just, they're both left-wing. And it's really the difference between them is, do you want Wales to be an independent country? Do you not? That's really the only real difference between Welsh Labour and Plaid Cymru. And it was inevitable. I wrote articles about this in Nation Cymru years ago, that the gap for a right-wing voice in Wales is ripe. And of course, Plaid Cymru ignored me and people called me an idiot. And it's happened that, yes, Reform lost the recent election, but getting over 35% of the vote, that's significant from nothing. And when Labour came into power in the early 20th century in the valleys, they didn't win all at once. It was a big swing like that exactly. And I'd be interested to see what Martha Tidville has to say. But as for comparing England and their identity divides, I think Wales is just reflecting anti-globalization a different way. It's interesting that it's come through what Reform are, in my view, essentially an English party. But if you don't have any other option, then people will be willing to vote that. And Wales is different than Ireland or Scotland in the fact that the reason our language has survived is because we're not afraid to take something English and then mutate it into something Welsh in order to not get wiped out, essentially. Whereas Ireland's been a bit, they get a bit rowdy and violent, let's be honest. And their language suffered because of that.
Yeah. So we've got Plaid Cymru, who you've said obviously is a left-wing party, but they want an independent Wales. How I mean, just because you vote Plaid doesn't mean you necessarily want an independent Wales, because lots of people vote for particular policies, or sometimes your choice is that poor. You're voting for the least worst option. Doesn't mean you believe in everything that party wants. That's a given. What's the current feeling in Wales about independence and about Plaid Cymru itself?
So I know from personal experience that a huge percentage of Plaid Cymru's vote, maybe 15 to 20%, are just people who love the Welsh language, the Welsh culture. and they don't really care about Welsh independence. That the language comes first for them. However, the feeling of independence is clearly growing. Um, I think in young people, it's as high as 35, 40%. Um, it's becoming increasingly clear. I think after the last decade in which England began to express its identity through Brexit and reform, Welsh people were looking for their own expression. That's not anti-Brexit or for Brexit. It's just we wanted to have some kind of say as well. Though ironically, for many of the English, Brexit was their answer to, Wales and Scotland get their devolution. Where's our voice? I think what we're seeing is people have a loss of meaning. People are atomized. People basically, they live in boxes. They go to work in an office that doesn't mean anything. They come home, they have like a microwave meal and stare into a box or a screen. And offering Welsh independence, that gives you a sense of meaning and identity. And I've said this to other people that our age is not a battle over economic ideologies, over GDP. We're looking for a new God. So we're looking for the strong gods. There was a writer recently published a book about the strong gods. People are looking for meaning, and Welsh independence is one way that you can get it. I see a lot more people supporting Welsh independence at the tops of the valleys, where the economic depression is most felt. But I also see more people supporting it in the interior of the cities, where Welsh language schools have opened up and people are, well, how do we get people who speak Welsh to fill these jobs? So they take people from Gwynedd and Ceredigion and Ysmon in the north, and people move. So what we're seeing within Wales are movements of population. And so there's areas of Cardiff now where the majority of people were born in Gwynedd or in Ysmon, what you call Anglesey. And so that's never happened before. And that's changing political attitudes, even in people around them. So they cluster in a group around what's called Treganna in Cardiff, a neighborhood of Cardiff. And that area is becoming more pro-independence because that movement of people from the north has flipped the culture. So it is growing. Whether that's going to be enough to spread outward from Cardiff in the south, I don't know. One interesting thing to me, though, is that in Wrexham in the northwest, that's not really happening. It's holding Labour in a way that the rest of Wales is not. So in the valleys, a lot of people are turning Reform, and the left-wing people who are seeing Labour people go to Reform, they're turning Plaid Cymru. I don't know yet if that means they support Welsh independence. It just means that, like you have in France, where the center is crumbling away, and people who wanted stability and calm are being forced into choosing a side. Now, my opinion is that a slight majority of Welsh people, if they're forced to choose between kind of British nationalism and Welsh nationalism, as like not like civic Blairite nationalism, but if they're forced to choose between a muscular England-centric kind of restoration nationalism and Welsh left-wing nationalism, I think a soft majority will actually tilt Plaid Cymru in that situation. However, Welsh people are very known for, they like committees, they like talking, they break up into factions. We have a lot of valleys, and every valley has its own opinion. So you might get, well, you have the Greens are growing in parts of Cardiff around immigrant areas. So that may splinter it again. As you know, as you ran for mayor in Manchester, you get lots of left-wing splinter groups. The left likes to break up into parts. So what we may see, in my opinion, is a core group of leftists who align with basically the Islamo-Marxists in England, and want a more globalized solidarity thing, and that means a bigger Britain, which is what socialism was when it began in Wales in the turn of the 1900s. And that's why the early Welsh nationalists, they didn't go with them, because the socialists were anti-nationalist. So to answer your question briefly, I think we're going to have a very, like, maybe 3 or 4 point majority of people who are leftist, but I see that leftist group breaking up into factions that will then fight each other. Whilst reform, well, the Tories are gone, but which is sad to see, because I think they can actually contribute a bit to Wales if they move past Thatcherism. But I think reform could actually form a government if it does not threaten Welsh devolution, and that would win more people over, which would then deny Welsh independence. So it depends on, really, if so. When I was in Cardiff last, I was walking down the high street, and I remembered when a friend of mine were walking before and another time, and she said, "Oh my gosh, there's so many Muslims now every time I come here." And they're becoming slowly a political force, even in Wales. And that's going to change Welsh politics. Now, is that new expression of identity going to align with stuff like your party in England, or um, kind of well, Mamdani just won the election in New York. Are they going to align with that kind of an anti-Western bloc that's going to be centered in England? Or are they going to align with Plaid Cymru? I don't know, but Plaid Cymru has clearly made overtures to win them over. I mean, I could show you images of Plaid Cymru's posters that show a woman in a burqa saying, "This is us." And I'm not being mean to Muslims when I say that, but what Plaid Cymru is doing is they're consciously choosing to see that community as a future demographic pool that they could win with, and they're using it. It's clever, but I don't know if that's going to split their base in other ways.
Yeah, I mean, we're saying this with the Green Party, aren't we, across the UK? They're doing well at the moment in the polls. It looks fantastic. But I predict over the next couple of years, they will implode. You can't have non-binary trans men and women sharing a space with ultra-orthodox Islamists. The Islamists will put up with them for so long until they gain power. And I think they're trying to take over the Green Party. I think this is a Trojan horse for them. But eventually there will be a civil war in the Greens, and the Greens will collapse. That's what I sort of predict there. But let's end on this question. Over the last 5 years, most of my life, I class myself as British. I lived in England. I was English, but English and British were basically the same thing. That's how I looked at it. The Scottish referendum in 2014 made me start saying I'm English. That radicalized me a little bit. I'm on the fence at the moment. I'm 50-50. Do I want an independent England? Do I want to stay in the Union? I'm 50-50. I think that's a discussion we're going to have over the next decade. If England decided to go it alone and break up the Union, which then would mean Wales are on their own, are the Welsh fearful of that? Would they embrace that? Can they survive on their own? What's the feeling in Wales for that?
Well, that's an interesting question, because one, there's nothing we could do in that situation but be independent. And there's nothing we could do. Um, you mentioned, could it survive on its own? Well, I'd say, well, Wales is bigger than Jamaica. Wales is about the same size as Israel. Wales is bigger than Slovenia, which is between Italy and Croatia, between Austria and Croatia. So yes, we could do it. Um, as for, what was the third part of your question?
Could they do it? Would they want it?
Yeah. So at that point, that makes me think of something. So you mentioned that yourself, you identify now as English, um, and it's changed over your life, English and British. So if you look at use of the word English and British in parliamentary speeches all through English history, they didn't call themselves British until David Lloyd George came up and he used the word British. And it was already on the rise, but he used that explicitly during World War One to shift the narrative, to create unity and to pull more soldiers toward the war. And so the idea that Englishmen are calling themselves British is actually, it's only 100 years old. Englishmen did not call themselves British before them. And he did that because Welshmen called themselves British. And it's interesting that Welsh nationalists over the course of the last century, they don't like being called British. But over the last 700 years before that, Welsh called themselves the British, the actual British in their writings, what they sung about. It's all there. And I think all it would take in that situation of England leaving is for Wales to re-identify with having British roots before all this happened and to not get so hung up on grievances and identity politics and just go back to what their own fathers before them talked about.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more of this over the next decade. I think the English will probably end up getting a referendum in the next decade because there's more and more people I'm speaking to, family, friends, people I meet who never mentioned this a couple of years ago, and then now seem to be only talking about the English. It's a shame because we are family at the end of the day, and for me, we're all cousins. We need to share these islands. We can share them as independent countries, and we can share them as under the union, but we still will have to share this island and get along and trade and things like that. So I'm sure all four nations would be successful.
I have no doubt we'd be friends in no matter which way we go.
Yeah, I think so.
We have to be.
And in one way, it might even bring us closer together because I think that there'll be less reason then to blame other parts of the union for our mistakes, for us not getting a fair share of this or fair share of that. It'd be down to those independent governments. But again, until that debate becomes real, I've not given it enough thought. So that's why I'm sat on the fence at the moment. I could be swung either way. But with the Brexit vote, I knew how I was voting on the Brexit vote. I knew when I was a teenager. I'm about 15, 16 years old. I knew then I wanted to leave the EU. So I was always a Brexiteer. Benjamin, I thoroughly enjoyed that conversation. You've made me understand Wales quite a bit better. And just like your videos, I like people, I like videos that make me think differently, that open my eyes up and go, never thought of it like that before. And that's what I like about your videos. For anyone watching, go in the description of the video, find Benjamin's channel. I'll advertise it there. Go and subscribe. He's going to make you think. It's not bubblegum TV, this. He's going to make you think, but it's worth it.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thanks, Benjamin, and let's do this again soon.
Yes. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.